This video will walk through basic GitHub setup as well as basic Visual Studio setup as part of a course through Speed Math and CS, a nonprofit in Redmond, Washington. So the first step in setting up your GitHub account is to simply go to github.com. And then what you want to do once you get to GitHub is either if you have a GitHub account already, you want to hit sign in, otherwise hit sign up for a new account. Since I already have an account, I'm going to hit sign in. And then with this, you can now continue with Google. So make sure you also have a Google account that works with GitHub. And now at this point, you should reach this screen. If you haven't reached this screen, that means that you've either need to verify your email address. That's often an issue with making a new account for the first time, or something is wrong in the sign up process. But once you reach the screen, you've been doing it right so far. And then what you'll want to do is up here, you'll want to hit this new. We're just going to call this Speed Math CS example for now. And then the description, you can put whatever you want here, not required. But what is required is that you make sure this is public. When we will be taking submissions, we will simply ask you to send your GitHub repository to us so we can grade your submissions and overall check if you can understand the lesson properly or if you're having any trouble. And we can troubleshoot and work through you by having access to this GitHub. So if you make it public, we can easily see your code and work through it with you during the classes. So this is a requirement. Make sure this is public. You can have a README if you want. I think these are pretty helpful, so I'm going to turn this on. But it's not required. So with this, create your repository. And then the biggest thing is if you don't see this screen, this could just be because you don't have the README file. But what you'll want to do is if you see any button on the screen to add a new file, to get to this screen, you have to have at least one file in the repo. So if you didn't select the option earlier of doing a README, you can just add a simple like m.md file, which is basically just a txt file in the sense, doesn't do anything to your code, and add that, then you'll get to this screen. Once you get to this screen, you want to hit this code button down here and hit open with GitHub Desktop. And if you already have GitHub for desktop, there'll be an alert up here. Otherwise, it'll redirect you to another website where you can go download GitHub Desktop and follow the instructions there. But because we already have GitHub Desktop, we're just going to hit open. If you've reached this point in the setup, don't worry, we are almost done and you're very close. So what we'll want to do now is open with GitHub Desktop. And what this is going to do is this is going to launch GitHub Desktop for us. GitHub Desktop is extremely helpful. And in fact, let me drag it here. So yeah, it'll look like this basically, and it'll tell you to clone a repository like so. If you don't see this pop up, it is likely because you have to log in to GitHub Desktop, which there'll be an alert at the bottom, which you can easily log into. And once you've logged in, I recommend that you fully close out GitHub Desktop, reopen it by hitting the code button, and then you'll see this thing where it says clone a repository. Once you see a clone a repository, what you'll want to do is just hit the clone button down here. Don't worry, you're not making a separate repository, you're just cloning it as a local file on your computer. So you can push to the GitHub without others seeing your changes while you're making them and only push your finalized changes. So it'll take a bit to clone, but if you see here, we have three main buttons, right? So the three main buttons here are very important. The first one is an open Visual Studio Code. And if you hit this and Visual Studio Code does not open up, you will likely be redirected to a website where you can download Visual Studio Code. Same thing, follow the instructions. But for most of you, it should open a new Visual Studio tab. And what you'll see here is you'll see your GitHub files like so. So you'll see this README file, for example. Yeah, and then you'll have to close out of that, right? So you'll see a README file where you can now edit the code. So for example, we'll say, welcome to the classes. This is an example. and then Control S to save, and it'll save your changes. And additionally, this will depend on what class you are in. So instructors will give more detailed instructions on what type of file you have to add. But to add files, what you'll want to do is hit the file button at the top and new file. And then up here, you'll see which type of file you want to do. And yeah, so you actually have to hit more text file, sorry. But more text file, then you'll see the select a language. And then you have a bunch of languages here, but for the sake of this, let's pretend that we are coding something up in HTML. And with this, let's say we make some code up, right? Like for example, and also if you see anything with GitHub Copilot chat, for now you don't need it, but it can be very helpful for later in your project when you're developing, as it can save you a lot of time. But for now, we'll ignore things like this. Yeah. And as you can see, this is what GitHub Copilot does essentially. It'll give you suggestions down here on what to add, and you can simply hit tab and get some suggestions, like so. But now that you're done with this, what you want to do is Control S. So ignore, yeah, and then it'll tell you to save as a file like this, and then it'll now load inside your actual, like under this folder. And then now let's go back to GitHub Desktop and walk through the other two buttons. But the first thing you'll see now is you'll see something like this, where it'll show you that you've made changes to the files and that you have to type a commit message down here. So this can be anything, but we recommend that you type a good message that'll help you locate which commits did what. So later when you have to debug or to revert to a previous version, it is super easy. So we'll just say created example website. And then with this, once you hit commit to files to main, this doesn't actually commit the files yet. It just creates this commit down here, and you can now push it through here. So what you want to do is hit this push origin button. And this makes it super easy to push your changes with just a click of a button. It is now visible to the public. So let's walk through the other two buttons that you can use. So the other button will be Show in Explorer. And what this will do is this will open up your file explorer like so. So you'll be able to see your repositories and these two files. But the most important button here is this one, where you'll be able to hit the view on GitHub and simply see your changes here. And right here, we can see under the commit log that we have created two commits. First was the initial commit, which is committed when you create the repository, and this commit committed 1 minute ago from GitHub Desktop. And with this, you have now fully set up GitHub Desktop and you're ready to take part in the speed classes and compete in some speed hackathons where you can win huge cash prizes and is a great opportunity to learn the basics of many languages, as well as things like machine learning, advanced Python, web dev, basic Python, tons of stuff coming up. So appreciate you watching the video. Be sure to subscribe, like, and we hope to see you in our classes soon.